Good afternoon. I am Kay Thomas, the Town of Wayne historian. I know some of you know who I am, but there are some new faces here. And on behalf of the Wayne History Group, I would like to welcome you to our presentation this afternoon. And I know a number of you know Vinny. Vinny has been a resident of the Keuka Village area for how many years?
A long time.
A long time. We'll just leave it at that, a long time. And he has done a number of things for the history group with the history group, and we're very pleased to have him come back once again and make another presentation. And as you can see from what is up on the screen so far, that the history of the hydro plant and the canal and the dam and everything else goes back more than 100 years, which is just amazing when you stop and think about it. So we are very happy to have everybody here, and I will turn it over to Vinny.
Thank you, Kay. Why am I doing this, or what's my background? Growing up as a kid, I spent many weekends throughout the year at Keuka Village. We had family friends who lived in the house directly across from the Switzerland Inn. In 1967, that house burned, and it was turned into a parking lot, and that's a present-day parking lot for the Switz. So that's where I grew up in the early 60s. And I hiked up the pipeline, which we're going to be talking about. I fished in front of the power plant, and I swam around the Keuka Hotel dance hall. And so what did I expect when I started this project about a year and a half ago? This is about all I knew about the power plant itself, that someone came up with the idea. It was constructed around 1928, because I knew that because in the concrete pipeline holder, there was a year 1928. That's how I knew 1928. It operated, I knew there was controversy in the 70s, 80s, and even 90s. Low water, both at Keuka and Juanita and Lamoka was an issue, and also Fishkill. And then I didn't know exactly when it closed, and then why hasn't the plant sold? That was my knowledge when I started this. So after a year and a half, what have I learned? It's complicated. We'll be going through this, but essentially the blue from the early 1900s to 1928 is the planning. The black and red are the operational years, and then in 2017, why hasn't the plant been sold? So we'll be talking about that. So you don't have to memorize anything, but just know that I found it to be complicated. So background, I have 5 different areas of background that we should talk about before we get started. Where did we obtain the information today? Hydroelectric power general history, the geography. The geography of where we're standing is very important. Who are the cast of characters, and who are the owners and operators? So this is where it became easy for me. We have approximately 8 boxes worth of files from 1914 to 2005. We have over 150 photos. We have dozens of daily operational records, 2 boxes of modern recording charts, 2 boxes of tax records, which we'll get into, 1 box of blueprints, 6 daily operation log books. We'll see photos of those. Several NICEAG reports in the last 20 or 25 years, 10 tubes of plans and blueprints, and operational records from Keuka and Juanita records over that time, its operation, 1928 to 1998. They recorded the water levels of all 3 lakes almost every day. So if someone wanted to go in and record the levels of the lake for the last 70 or 80 years, that information is there. Now, what happened was when I got here, Bob Cantfield, who's back there, Kay, Steve Butchko up here, and John Lonergan, the former historian for the town, obtained these records. And when I came, they were all sitting on the shelf. I didn't do anything. They did everything in accumulating them from various sources over the past decade or maybe even longer. So Kay contacted me and said, "Do you want to sort through these?" And I said, well, okay. So I've been at it about 14 or 15 months, and my guess is I've got another at least 2 years worth of work, maybe 3. But I like doing it, so. So again, background, hydroelectric power history. Greeks used it 2,000 years ago. In the 1700s, hydropower was used for logging and milling in the U.S. By 1910, 40% of the power in the U.S. was supplied by hydroelectric power. By 1940, 75% of the power in the western New York was provided by hydroelectric power. And still today, New York State derives 17% of its power today from hydroelectric. And I had the opportunity to tour the Cornell University power plant, which has been continuously operating since I think 1918 or 1919. So some of these power plants are still in use today that are years and years old, over a century old. Now, again, background. If you've ever been to the Rockies and you listen to people, you say there's an east-west continental divide, you take a cup of water and throw it to the east, it goes to the Mississippi drainage basin. If you throw it to the west, it goes in the Pacific Ocean. Well, a lot of people don't know there's a north-south continental divide also. And if you throw a glass of water up towards the lake, it drains into the Great Lakes. If you throw the glass of water to the south towards Elmira and Corning, it goes down to the Chesapeake. But if you look closely, well, wait, one of those drainage basin delineations is close to here. And if you look closer, it goes right through Wayne. I don't know the street location or whatever, but it's very close to where we are now. And if you can look, Juanita and Lamoka drain south, Cohocton, and then the Chemung River, and then out to Chesapeake. So that's important as we go on, this drainage. The Keuka drainage goes north to the Great Lakes. Now, who are the main characters whose names continually come up in the files? First of all, Robert O. Haight. He was a consulting engineer. He was from Corning. His family founded the Southern Tier Roller Mills. And if you go in Corning on West Market Street, I think in the 200 or 300 block, on the odd side, on one of the buildings, there's a plaque that talks about the Southern Tier Roller Mills. And he was the engineer for the town of Corning and Painted Post. He was the originator of use of hydroelectric power in the Central Finger Lakes area. He had the idea in about 1910, and he was engineer for Lamoka Lake Corporation project from 1915 to 1939. He unfortunately passed away in 1939. I think he was only 57 or 58 years old. This was his life. This is what he did. Well, I don't think he had a family. He had lots of brothers, sisters, and parents and grandparents who were physicians and New York State senators and assemblymen, etc. But he himself, I don't think, ever married. Now, Ellis Lorimore Phillips. If any of you have been to Cornell and heard of or gone to Phillips Hall, it's an electrical engineering building, and it was named after him. He was born in Yates County in Italy. He grew up around Prattsburg, attended schools in Naples, and the school districts changed, and he moved around in the area. He graduated from Cornell in 1895 in electrical engineering, and Cornell was the first university in the U.S. to offer a degree in electrical engineering. Essentially, he founded Lilco, Long Island Lighting Company, and he became very, very, very financially successful. He had financial and engineering interests in over 30 electrical companies just in western New York State alone. That's not to mention anything he had in Pennsylvania or the eastern part of the state. And he had major input into the Lamoka Power Corporation from 1922 to 1935. And the other person that keeps coming up in the files is W.P. Gannon. He was out of Syracuse, and he was an attorney, and he is mentioned a lot, but I don't know that much about him. His letters are very dry, and they're always to the point, and I can't find anything in the files about him, so I'm going to have to do more research. So those are the three characters that really push this project through. And this is Phillips over here and his wife, and this is his son. And his son was president of Ithaca College from 1976 to about 1990. And this is the only photo I can find of Robert O. Haight, said newspaper head of Lamoka project. So, And who were the owners and operators? From 1915 to 1922, Lamoka Power Corporation. Then from 1922 to 1935, financial problems reorganized Lamoka Power Corporation. Then again in 1935, late 1935, Lamoka Power Corporation went bankrupt and was purchased by Keuka Lake Power Corporation. Then finally, in 1952, NYSEG bought everything, and it was purchased on the steps of the Schuyler County Courthouse at that time. And from 1998 to the present, when the project closed, NYSEG has been the owner. So, Chapter 2, Early History from 1910 to 1921. You don't have to remember everything on here. I'm just going through certain things here. Small electric companies in New York and Pennsylvania had formed after the discovery of electric in 1900s. And a lot of these plants only produced enough power for 2,000 or 3,000 or 4,000 houses, or maybe specific businesses and another 500 houses. They were tiny, and a lot of them were hydroelectric power. In 1910, Robert O. Haight was working for what's the equivalent of the U.S. Geological Survey out in the West. And he saw the hydroelectric boom out there and decided to look at Keuka and Juanita and possibly build a plant there. And how we got that idea was from a height difference, and you really can't see that until we go to another slide later on. But it was a sheer genius what he thought. And then in 1915, October 28th, this is one of the oldest documents we have, a certificate of incorporation for Lamoka Power with New York Secretary of State. And that document looks like this. And it was, I think, a 12 or 13 page legal size document essentially incorporating the business. And if it says in here, Lamoka Power Corporation. The name changed several times to include water and other electric. I don't think the legal requirements were as tight back then as they are now. So now, first mentioned in newspapers, Corning and Elmira capitalists have incorporated Lamoka Power Corporation with $300,000 to develop the Lamoka Valley Corning villages in vicinity. That comes from the Cortland Democrat. And in 1917, which we'll talk about in a second, the original plan, what was it? So as we go on, we can see the plan beginning to take shape. This is the perspectives that raised that $300,000 for the first 1915 investors. So we have that document too. And this tells all the shares, and you can see the first one, J. Towner Haight, he was Robert's older brother, and he apparently had some money too. And so a lot of the Haight's are in here, and I thought that, yeah, there's another one down here. I think there's 4 altogether, 5, whatever. So the family was involved in this. Now, as I say, the original plan in 1917, there may have been other plans, but this is the first one that I can find. And this original plan was actually encased in this 6-inch by 6-inch piece of paper that we found. And what we did is we took a photo of it, we went to Staples, had it enlarged to a 18 by 24, and that's on the back table. It's in very, very good condition. I'm very surprised, so take a look at that after. But this was the background for the power plants. This was their plan. First of all, they were going to dig another canal from Penn Yan to Dresden. They were going to put in a small holding pond and put a power plant in Dresden. That never came to fruition. But the power plant was constructed. That was ended up being a coal-fired power plant. And I think it was one of the first ones in the United States that was using powdered coal. But the second idea is Lamoka diversion. They were going to put a dam on the Cohocton down here. What it would have done is essentially flood the valley and make the volume of water about 2.5 times what it is today or was then. And so they were going to flood this channel. And in order to do so, they were going to purchase over 1,000 properties. I'm sorry, 100 properties. I've got it on the next screen. Let me get the right. Again, this is a Keuka diversion. This is the one that never came to fruition. There's talk that they wanted to keep the Keuka Lake elevation at 714 and not 709. There's some discussion about that. They wanted to keep water from the existing Keuka outlet and essentially dig the canal, as I said, build a regulating reservoir at the end, construct a hydro plant, and as I say, it was never completed, and the power plant up there today, I believe, is going to be reopened shortly, or is reopened.
It's Greenwich.
Is it? Okay. Now this is the dam down here that was never built. They wanted to purchase 5,000 acres from 100 people, 100 properties. That was it. That's the right statistic. They had to determine elevations, as the U.S. Geological Survey had not determined the elevations in the area. It was so low, it was so rural in there, so wilderness, that they had to do all their own elevation determinations. They wanted to dam Mud Creek down here and create Little Lake Reservoir. And all they were going to do is raise this about 4 or 5 feet. The height of these lakes over the last 100 years literally has been 1,098, 1,099 feet above sea level. They try to keep it in there. So if you own property around the lake, you know there's always controversy. Is the lake a little bit too high or too low? And they were going to construct a pipeline down here to the power plant after they built the canal. And they wanted to take advantage of the 385-foot head difference between the two lakes. So Lamoka and Juanita are up here and Keuka is down, and I've got a really good photograph as we go on that shows us that. Now, this is also back there. This document I just turned to black and white, but it's on the back table. Steve's holding it right now. But this was one of the documents that they used as a prospectus to get money for the project. And what I've done is essentially outline where the proposed dam would be and how it would flood the western valley, and this reservoir would be the Little Lake Reservoir, and the number of cottages on here would be greatly reduced, and it would all be used to feed the power plant, which was originally proposed near Grove Springs. Again, these plans changed all the time, but I don't have very much information on that. Just 1 or 2 documents say that around 1915, 1916. So if that would have happened, things would have looked a lot different today than they did and they do now. They use lots of statistics. At 1,100 feet, these are the capacities. You can see if the normal capacity is 1,098, 1,099, somewhere around then, that they only wanted to raise it 3 or 4 or 5 feet. And by doing that, you would almost double the capacity of the system, or the water that they would have for the power plant. And they did a lot of calculations. And just so you know, according to them, I haven't checked these figures, but Lamoka at 1,098 feet has about 5.4 billion gallons of water in it. Juanita has about 3.8 billion gallons. And Keuka has almost 380 billion gallons of water in it. So what they wanted to do was raise it about 5, 6, 7 feet, and if they did that, the volume would go up to 21 billion gallons in the reservoir. So it's about 2.5 times more. And we'll talk about this figure later. How much water on an 8-hour shift did the power plant use every day, 8 hours? About 47 million gallons. So comparatively, yes, it's a lot of water, but it's not a lot of water compared to what's in there. I'm not going to go through this. These are the power calculations. Then in 1918, there was a New York State law passed. Chapter 582 of the laws of New York created Lamoka Electric Water Power Corporation of Corning, and they actually have a date of probable commencement of service, 1923. That really didn't happen. And this is actually the part of the New York State law that went through, and there was controversy over this. It was in a time where water law was big out west, and they requested a lot of that legal information from the west, Colorado especially, be sent here, and he went through it, and they actually incorporated this into New York State law. And again, the reason I mentioned earlier is that Haight's family were elected officials up in Albany. So he used that as leverage to actually get this passed. So, sound familiar today even? In 1919, the Rochester Chamber of Commerce supports Penn Yan in their opposition to the Hydro project. But again, remember that Lamoka bill vigorously opposed by Rochester Chamber of Commerce. And the reason they were opposing it is because the economic value of the canal at that time was going to be in jeopardy if they built another canal. There was only so much water to go through there. So the original canal might dry up or might not be of use. So there was a big argument for years and years over this and who's going to take which side. Now, this is sort of an aside. Land purchase history. I've never seen genealogy applied to land property history before. We actually have this chart in our files here. This is outstanding. This starts with a Phelps and Gorham purchase down here and talks about different lots and blocks that are purchased by people and then how they go towards the future. So this was 1795 to 1917. And so if anyone owns property around Juanita and Lamoka and is interested in this, who knows, some of your ancestors' property or maybe some of your property is actually in here. But we have several charts like this that talk about property and location. It just, to me, that was absolutely fascinating. Now, as we get closer to planning, and so we're in the 1922 to 1927 time frame now. Public opinion and apparent lawsuits against purchase of lands damming Mud Creek diversion show up. And about the same time, the first communication that mentions E.L. Phillips in New York. His office was in New York at the time, I think on Madison Avenue. And so I don't know how Haight and Phillips got together, but I know Phillips did come back here several times. He had family living in the Naples area, and I know Naples School actually had him back to speak, I think, in the 1920s and 30s, because, you know, he was successful at the time, and so he came back to speak to the school. And I believe his mom was still alive until the 1920s or 30s, too. So he did come back here often. And this is typical. In November 1922, Hornell Electric Company goes bankrupt and is bought out by the Phillips Group. So as I said, Phillips had his hand in almost 30 or over 30 small electric companies in the western part of the United States. And again, I don't have all that information as how those transactions transpired, but I do know that Phillips has a foundation that's still active, and there are certain relatives that are still alive, and I know Steve's been in contact with certain ones, and so there's still a link to the area, if you will, from Phillips. And again, as I say, he was extraordinarily successful, we'll put it that way. This is something that went on. Every time we say dam, I have to distinguish. There was a proposed dam that never got built on the Cohocton, and there was a regulating dam at the south end of the Juanita-Lamoka or Little Lake chain. And that dam is still there today. And we'll show some pictures of it. But the dam always needed work, or people were always asking for it to be higher or lower. So this dam is, for literally almost 100 years, has been in the news, and people in Juanita and Lamoka have had comments one way or the other about it, requests. This is just a little story about some engineers. This is in 1924, had been up and down the Juanita, Lamoka, Cohocton area doing surveying work. And again, they didn't have the elevations, the USGS elevations that you and I can go to today on the topographic maps. So that caused some stir at the time, and people were wondering what they were doing down there. We have a lot of 1920s photographs and engineering reports from that area. So if anyone lives down in the Cohocton area out in the middle of nowhere, there may be some family farm photos or flooding photos or whatever down that way that we have from the 1920s. Now, in researching it, you just sort of stumble on certain things. And what I did was I went through the Town of Wayne board meeting minutes from 1920 to about 1950. I just haven't had time to go through the rest. And I stumbled upon various resolutions. But the Town of Wayne voted extending New York Central Electric Corporation's franchise from March 1st, 1927 to 1930. That was on May 10th, 1927. And this is what that resolution looks like. It's essentially handwritten. A town board meeting was held at the hall at 8 p.m., full board present. A motion was made to extend the New York Central Electric Corporation's franchise from March 10th, 1927 to 1930. Now, question is, when was the first New York Central Electric Corporation franchise extended? I couldn't find that in the records. What was it for? I have no idea. So these are questions that I'm still researching. And who was the New York Central Electric Corporation? I don't know that either. So I'm still working on that. But again, we're trying to draw records everywhere we can. Now, there are several lawsuits that end up. Essentially, the first thing and the last thing I wanted to, 1922 to 1926, the lawsuits were still going on 5, 6, 7 years later, that people were complaining about the future of Lamoka, Juanita, Little Lake Reservoir, and that people had land contracts, and Lamoka Power really wasn't living up to their end of the deal, if you will. So whatever you want, lake height, or if they promise to buy certain things, certain pieces of property or pay, it was unfortunately not a clear-cut business opportunity for a lot of the landowners. So we're going to skip ahead to 1927. The original plan you see are those two, the Dresden plant and the Keuka plant with the big dam was never constructed. So this is also back there on the table. What they said in 1927, this is after Phillips got involved, they're going big. They're going grandiose. They're going to have 5 stages. The first stage is the Keuka project, and then they're actually going down further in the Cohocton Basin and make another reservoir down there. Then number 3 is the Dresden, and then number 4, that Bath one. Then it's not north of Bath, sort of 5 Mile Creek and Reservoir enlargement. So they had huge plans, and they actually talked about putting 2 or 3 plants on Keuka alone. But again, that was only one or two pieces of paper that I can find, documents that I can find. But to me, this is tremendous how they were thinking. They were thinking big, and they were thinking regionally. Now, this is one of the nicest pictures we have. This was taken from the bluff in 1928, and this is Keuka here, and Penyans up that way, Hamlin Sports that way. So why is this probably the most important photograph? This is why. This is Keuka Hill Road here. This is Hyatt Hill. And this back here is Juanita Lake. You can just see a little of it, and there's 385 feet of height difference between Keuka and Juanita. This is what made the engineers drool. And from the Juanita to Keuka, it's only about 3 miles, 3.5 miles, depending on where the pipeline goes. But this was probably the most important photograph that everyone looked at in the time to build that power plant. Now, the other thing I mentioned is that money was always a problem, and they had to reorganize several times, and they had to put out different literature to raise money. Again, this is similar to what we just saw. The height of Niagara Falls to the bottom is about 213, 214 feet. But the height of Lamoka development to the powerhouse on Seneca Lake essentially was almost 640 feet. So you've got the height from Lamoka to Keuka is 385. Then there was another 250 feet of power, potential energy. So this is how they were selling it, is that we have a tremendous amount of potential energy here. Let's harness it. Now, let's move to construction of the plant. And there was a company out of Sodas called Dutcher Construction, and this is from the Owego Palladium on August 21st, 1928. Dutcher Construction Company of Fulton and Sodas was awarded the contract for the Keuka hydroelectric project by Lamoka Power Corporation. So 1928, and remember when they started this, 1910 was the first idea, 1917 was the first plan, so we're talking 10, 15 years later or more. And we have some really nice photographs of the construction. First of all, you can see the gentleman down there digging by hand. This is where the power plant is today, and you can see the cofferdam is made up of wood and tarps. And no one has hard hats on, probably not OSHA compliant today. And here they are, looks like digging rock by hand. And I'm still looking. I do think they used some dynamite down here to get through the rock core at the bottom. But I haven't confirmed that, though. And this is construction of one of the canals along the way between Wayne and the top of the hill. And also, just to interject something else, that people were making money off of this in other realms. What this developer did is say that here's a power plant going to be constructed, and we are selling lots, tent lots, I believe, in Sylvan Beach. These things, I don't know what the dimensions were, I forget, but I think they were something like 15 by 30, just big enough to put tents on. So I've got the rest of this information in the files in there, and I just can't remember the exact. But anyway, you can see that they were using the construction of the power plant to say development is here, and you can live by the lake that's gorgeous, etc. So sales and marketing. Now, one of the most interesting things, when they built the pipelines or the penstock from the top of the hill down towards the power plant, there were a number of them. Sometimes there was one, sometimes there were two, and sometimes there were three. And the first ones were made out of wood. And Bob, do you remember what the wood was, the type of wood?
I believe it was Douglas.
Douglas fir. And so these were all, I think, 2x8s or 2x10s. And they had a form in the middle. to keep it round, and they would keep the forms down here and they would build around. You can see the cradles here. But these are spectacular photos. And how would you like to work in that environment? Look at that view, and you can see the straps around it too. Now this is probably one of the first ones. It was made totally out of wood. And here's, I believe, a metal one on the left over here at a later time. And this must have been a blowout here, I'm guessing. You can see the wood here, and it may have been frozen or something like that. Now, when the penstock comes down the hill, if you ever walked on Keuka Village Road and the power plant's on your left, you're walking on Keuka Road, the pipeline actually goes under the road, Keuka Village Road. And here is one that either was decommissioned or was in use at one time or a future use, but this is the existing one here. So we actually got to go in the plant and look at that. Now, again, here's one of the first slides I looked at, and we're sort of up into here, and the Lamoka Power Corporation produces the first electricity from Keuka plant on October 29th, 1929. It only operated for an hour or two that day, and they had a little trouble. The first full day, I think, was November 3rd or November 4th. But how unfortuitous that happened on that day. Again, this is another prospectus of how many shares, and they're raising money again, and a lot of these aren't dated, but there were 5 or 6 events that happened. That's just some more of that. Now, sort of switching gears, taxes. Again, if you ever want to do genealogy and are sort of stumped, but know your relatives own property up here and are looking up here, this may be a good place to look. We have 2 boxes, nothing but taxes from 1923 to 1939. Federal, state, school, you name it, we have it. And this one is Steuben County. This has 3 counties in it, Steuben, Yates, and Schuyler. Plus some Penn Yan and Savona information. We have corporate income tax from 1923. We have Treasury Department information. We have one document that's literally 8.5 by 48 inches. It just keeps going, and there's got to be 30 or 40 pages of this, and it talks about property owners and if they're paid and if they should pay or owe, and it just goes into great detail. We have lots of blueprint paper that lists certain, again, people who own property, and there's a town of Wayne, Jeffrey Wise. So if there's any Wise people out here, total acreage, the deed of the date, et cetera, drawing file number. So everything is connected. We have a ton of this information, and it may be good for genealogists. Now, when it first started to operate in 1929, so what was the hydro plant? What were the components? This is probably the most important slide. The entire system is the answer. If you start at the Bradford Dam, which exists now, and then Lamoka Lake, then there's an island in here, and then there's a canal presently connecting Lamoka and Juanita, and DEC owns a lot of it. It's public access, as you know. You probably go by there and see the boats coming in. Then there's a canal, which most of it still exists today. There was a head gate, which we'll show some slides of, the penstock, and the power plant. So when you go by the power plant, that's only about 10% of the universe of what we're talking about. This is an entire system that NYSEG owns. So this was the head gate as far as I know, and it didn't last very long. It only lasted 4 or 5 years. I believe it was burnt in a fire, and it may have been set intentionally. I don't know. I wasn't there. But a couple of things we can notice is that you can see the 2 pipes coming out of here, but there's space for a third pipe. Now, what was that for? It was for the future, and was actually used at a specific time, and we'll get into that. So when I was a kid, I said we walked the pipeline up. This was the way the pipeline looked in the 60s and 70s and 80s until they took it out. I'm not sure, around 2000, I think. But this is what it looked like. And again, we're still talking about the components of the project itself. So this, to me, was one of the most important blueprints in there. And this was the generator up here, the turbine here, and then the discharge down here. But that doesn't look very good. So what I did was I reversed it, the color, and on the first floor, the generator is up here. This is where the power comes from, actually. The basement turbine, this is where the water comes in from the penstock, and this is a discharge, the draft tube or tail race. And this was in the basement, sub-basement. And so this generator is actually there today. It's still there from 1928. And a gentleman and I were talking earlier, we have the information. It's a General Electric generator, and it's got a specific serial number on. If you want to know anything about that generator, you go online and you type in GE generators, the number, and its operation manual will come up online. It's still there. It's still operational. Once they made these things, they were made to last. And even though this hasn't been used in 20 years, you could learn anything you want about that machine. It's still there today. It was a few months ago. So now this is a turbine. In here, the water came around and essentially turned this, and this actually went up to the generator to produce electric. And this is where the water is discharged down here, the tail race. So all those components are still there, and that's typical of what's in a power plant today. Now this is an aerial photo from, I think, 2012. The town of Wayne took a helicopter ride about 4 or 5 years ago and took these pictures, and this is a plant recently. You can see that the trees are still cut, but most of the pipeline has been taken away. There is still a 20 or 30 foot section down here near the plant itself. Now, I also said that the dam on the Juanita-Lamoca end still exists. There it is today. It's sort of a small thing. I forget the name of the road here. If anyone of you was around there, I'm sure you drive over it a lot. So that dam is still there today. And it regulates, again, the two lakes at about 1,098, 1,099 feet. And this is part of the canal. You can just see a little of it. There's a better shot of the canal. As I said, most of it is still there today. It's sort of stagnant. Now, I also mentioned that we had log books. This is a log book from April 1933 to July 1933. And in there, again, most of everything was done by hand until the 1950s or so, when they started to use mimeograph machines and have forms and typed up. But the plant usually operated by itself for 8 hours a day. And it was done that way because of the water. The quantity of water really wasn't enough to power the plant 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. The plant usually operated between 30 and 75% of the time, because in the summer there was hardly any water available from Juanita and Lamoca, so it just operated really in the colder months, and sometimes just 8 or 16 when there was a lot of rain. Maybe you get 24 hours out of work out of it. But again, here's what I was talking about. These are the lake heights. Almost every day for 60 or 70 years, they have lake heights of all 3 lakes. So if anyone wanted to do research, I mean, page after page after page for years, you would have it. And see, Keuka was at 710. They wanted to keep it at 709 a lot. So again, the height differences were pronounced. Now, 1935 foreclosure sale of assets. The plant had property in 3 counties. It was auctioned off in Bath, purchased by the newly formed company Keuka Power Corporation. The next time, a few years later, when the Keuka Lake Power Corporation went bankrupt, it was sold on the steps of Schuyler County in Watkins Glen. This was in Bath, Steuben County. So again, I'm not a lawyer, I don't know why, but when hard times came, it was auctioned off. So this is just a newspaper article talking about Keuka Power Corporation purchases of power, Lamoka, in 1935. And again, they just ran into bad luck, hard times, when they opened again in the same day as the Great Depression started. This is just a nice photo of the bluff in the background and the substation and the power plant. Now, a lot of people don't remember that there was a gas boom here in the 30s besides the ones in the 2000s. And it affected the power plant. What the problem was is that the technology was not as good then as it is today. Today, if we find natural gas, one of the first questions they ask is, how much is there? What's the volume? How long will it last? Well, what happened here is that they found natural gas everywhere in this region, even northern Pennsylvania. And so they just started drill, and they thought they located a bonanza. And several transactions took place. A company called Tri-State Oil and Gas of Elmira purchased 1/3 of interest in Lamoka Power. The gas plant is constructed. Summer use of gas 24 hours a day, hydropower to be used when available. So there was all this enthusiasm when the gas was found, and they're going to put a gas plant right next to the power plant. And this is a list of wells nearby in the village of Wayne, and there were just lots of them. But this is a slide I wanted to get to. They had so much hope for this natural gas that 2 main things happened. First of all, they built this plant. There's a hydro plant today. This is Route 54 right here. And you're saying, well, I never saw that building before. You probably didn't. It was only there for, 36 months, if that? And what happened was they purchased 3 Worthington engines, and these engines were humongous. And what they did is they were using the natural gas to power the engines, to power the power plant down here. And they thought, oh, great. But literally 18 months later, most of the wells that were drilled went dry. And so this plant was decommissioned, and Kay knows a lot more about the plant, where it is today. Some of it was taken down to Bath.
Yes, it's the Lane Pipe Corporation. It still exists.
Still exists. But if you walk by the power plant today, and the power plant's on your left, look to your right. There's a 10-foot concrete wall there that's dilapidated. That was the foundation for this building. So although the metal portion is not here, the concrete foundation is still there today. But again, it didn't last that long. And this is just a memo. In 1935, in July 1935, there was a humongous flood in the area, and it didn't go well for the canal or for the power plant, and so we've got all the information on that. And foreclosure of assets, we can skip that, we've done that. This is Tri-State Gas Reporter, same thing. We're going to be all millionaires, and Okay, miscellaneous items here. I think I'm going to end right on time. It's 10 of, so just miscellaneous items that came up that sort of didn't fit in. A lot of people, as I say, did not like what was going on with the hydro plant or whatever, and there was an attempted dynamiting of not the Lamoka Dam, it was actually the one regulating Lamoka and Juanita Lake. And I've never found any articles claiming that they found who did this or whatever, but it did do damage. And obviously, if that happened today, it would be all over national news. Again, the dam continued to be a problem. Who's going to pay for it, or if it needs repair, what's going to happen? And moving forward, this is 1984. Charlie Morris was a supervisor here then, and this talks about the quality of the water and what they were going to do. So there were several years of this between the Keuka Lake Association, NYSEG, the town of Wayne. Residents of Keuka wanted one thing, residents of Juanita and Lamoka wanted another. So it was just almost an ongoing controversy for 2 or 3 decades. And one of the things that they did to try to reduce the odor was they sprayed some of the water coming down out and try to aerate it. So there were lots of things that happened in the second half of its operation that we're not going to get into today. Water line burst at Keuka. This is something Bob Canfield mentions in here. Now, Bonnie Barney's not here, is she? I posted some information on Facebook a few months ago. And Bonnie Barney, who is the historian or was historian for the Keuka Yacht Club, responded and said, sent me this picture. And so I said, big deal, looks like people building a dock. So what she said is, I'm going to read this for you. A related story, the flume, which is a pipeline I think she's talking about, was originally wood. In 1941, it collapsed and was replaced by a steel one. The planking was sold to the Keuka Yacht Club for $11 per 1,000 foot. That's 1 cent per foot. They used it to build a dock over 100 feet long with a 40-foot T across the front at the Helvetica House, which they leased from Carl Schmeikers as their clubhouse. This was in preparation for the 1941 Central New York Yacht Racing Association Regatta. The Helvetica House stands just north of the public boat launch at Keuka Village. So she shared that story. I can't find anything in our history about that, but it's something that just, I think, adds to the, enhances the story here. Now, again, we were allowed to go into the power plant. And there are several areas upstairs where I won't call offices, but you could sit at certain desks or whatever. And could you imagine having that office right on the shore? Look at that view. And something else, I ran across this in a Department of Transportation posting in Alabama. They were talking about cofferdams or keeping water out of areas that were wet and they needed to be dry. What happened here, that NYSEG actually did not want to put a cofferdam, did not want to get the permits to do that. They had to keep the water back to do some work here in the early 90s, I believe. So what they did is they got a tube in a tube. They got a special polyethylene tube wrapped in geotextile, and they filled it with water, and you essentially lay it there like blubber, and it keeps the water out. And they used it for, I think, a week, and they decommissioned. It only takes a half a day to pump it dry and fold it up. So just things you would never think about that are out there. And my last question is, why hasn't the plant been sold? And the answer is, it's really a system. It's not just the plant. And again, we have been talking to NYSEG, and I don't know what's the best word for a response. Is confusing? None?
It takes time.
Yeah, 20 years, it takes time. So really, this is the holding thing here. that's a regulating dam, and it's got some legal consequences to it statewide and height-wise or whatever. NYSEG owns and maintains that along with some other properties in here. So I think what they're doing is they just don't want to sell the plant or give the plant away. They want to get rid of the whole system. And I don't know if there's a way out of that or whatever. I'll leave that for someone a lot smarter than I am. And then finally, always like to leave with a nice picture. I took this about a year ago, a plane flying over the power plant, nice sunset with a bluff in the way, so in the bluff in the background. So that's my presentation, and I'll be happy to answer any questions. Yes, sir.
Hi, you had mentioned that the lake level back in those days was 709 feet, 10 feet. If I'm not mistaken, today it's 714 to 715, am I correct on that?
That's what I understand it.
So the level has risen in that lake, as it's probably risen in the two other lakes up here, am I correct?
That's my understanding.
So what's the cause and the effect of it? Why would it raise?
I know there's been meetings over the years, and when the new gates were put in 20 or 30 years ago in Keuka, that was a huge thing with the Keuka Lake Association and in the surrounding lakes. So I don't know, I know Bill Weber, who was the Keuka Lake Association president back then, and he knows the answer to that question, but I do not know the answer to that question.
Is he still alive?
Yes, Bill lives over on the west side of the lake in Pulteney, and he and I are good friends, and I will ask him that, and that's a good question. And I'm sure there's other people who know. Maybe the Keuka Lake Association knows now.
Because that's 5 feet, 6 feet, that's a lot of beach area.
I know they're going through it right now with Ontario and Erie and the Great Lakes with all the rain they've had, and so that's a good question. But I'm sure there's lots of politics involved, and I know it took a long time to come up with those agreements of heights. So, yes.
Yeah, you mentioned that the power plant never operated 24 hours a day. It was only operated
Seldom.
intermittently. Yeah.
Yes.
Did that mean that folks around here only had power during those hours, or were there other sources of power?
Actually, that connected into the grid almost from day one. There was a grid. So it didn't power only the area around. Just as a note, you asked that question, I have an answer for another question. If you go up now Keuka Village Road at night, Keuka Village Road is the only road around the lake that has streetlights. And there's a reason for it. In the 40s, that's a special district of the town of Wayne. And there's a special taxing code or line or whatever that they pay. And I don't know if that was associated with a power plant. It was? Yes. So that was, but anyway, that's just a little bit of trivia. But it was, most of the power went into the grid. How big that grid was or where it went, I don't know, but it wasn't hooked up to your house next door or whatever directly. It was dumped into the grid. Yes, sir.
Is there any truth to the story that when there wasn't enough water up the hill to run the, well, you know my question. Yeah.
Yes, you're absolutely right. And again, it's not well documented. One of the reasons is it didn't last that long. And that's what that third pipe was for. What happened when they found natural gas, the plant did run 24 hours a day for whatever, 24 months, 18 months, whatever. And they actually pumped water back uphill at night. But again, it didn't last that long, and it's not that well documented. Yes, the answer is yes. Yes, Jerry.
As I recall, there were 3 Worthington engines, and they were actually double pairs. Then there was a fourth, and those 3 only made electricity to go on the grid. There was a fourth engine in that building dedicated to pumping the water back up the Lamoille, and when you start producing electricity to do that.
That could be. I'm not that much into the details yet, but I know there was an Ingersoll Rand engine in there and the Worthingtons. So that's a detail I don't know. Yes, Steve.
Just another one of those little tiny tidbits that you've been throwing out. The wire, John can probably elaborate on this. The Garrett family had a wire laid underneath the lake from the power plant to the other side, which still exists, and to give them electricity, they were the first to have electricity on the bluff. That would have been 28 as well.
It's still there?
Yep.
Still being used?
No,
It's cut, but some of it is still there. It comes down the telephone pole and the conduit is still there.
And a little stand over at Garrett's cottage is there still, where the wire came on the other side.
Any other questions? Yes, buddy.
What ultimately killed the Dresden hydro plant? Because that sounds like a good idea to me.
I don't know.
Better than that.
What?
It has a lot more.
My honest opinion is this is sort of a sad story. Unfortunately, nothing really ever worked in this plant as designed. You know, it's supposed to be bigger than it was. It's supposed to operate 24/7. It didn't. The people around both lakes were unhappy because of fish kills and smells. It opened on the first day of the Depression. It was essentially closed because of consumer complaints. They can't sell it now, or they can't give it away, or they can't decide. Just nothing went right for this plant. So whatever that means, or so I don't know other than that. Yes.
Didn't you say, piggyback on what he just talked about, that some of the concerns was that the water that drained into Seneca Lake out of Keuka was going to be diverted into that power plant, and they were afraid that it would maybe clog up the ecological system of that area up there?
I know there was some controversy many years ago about the quality of one water from one lake not being the same as the other lake, and it's resulting in fish kills, and we don't want their water. So
There already. I mean,
So-
the only difference is it goes through a pipe. You know, I don't mean,
What I heard was it was going to be diverted into the power plant, and that canal would then end up drying up.
there were, I'm sure there was as many controversies for that thing.
To add to the other wire, just add more of that silly stuff. But a wire was also dropped under Seneca Lake from Dresden over to Sampson with power for the
Naval
the
station.
naval station.
And that's still there, I think, isn't it?
That's still there, and to remove it, the cost was, and they're supposed to remove it when it stops servicing. So there's three operating wires in there. One has already failed. There's still two left, but that's 100 years later.
Yes.
I've also heard that this plant could not work today because the water from Keuka Lake goes north. And the water from Juanita and Lamoka Lake, by nature, goes south.
You can't
So
mix
they're
watersheds.
mixing two watersheds. I guess that's not allowed now.
Correct.
Yes, that was the north-south boundary there. Yes, buddy.
yeah, I mean, early on, you were talking about the Cohocton Dam. No, really it was on Mud Creek, wasn't it?
Yes.
How far up about?
I think it was only two or three miles away from the Cohocton. It was
There's
close.
still markers south of Bradford. If you go in the woods down there by that creek, you can see different stone markers or concrete markers that they had posted for the
elevations, potential.
elevations. Just this is widths and things like that.
It's in the middle of nowhere. Put it that way
Pretty
still.
rugged hike in there. but
Yes.
It's there.
Yes, sir.
I wasn't clear about that article about the dynamiting of the Bradford Dam. What was the deal on that?
The rumor has it that people at the lake thought the water was too high or too low. And
They dynamited the
some farmer was accused of dynamiting it because it was flooding his land or didn't have enough water for his land or property. So again, there were so many people throughout the years doing this that they didn't like it, and you know, I don't want to sell my property. It's condemnation almost, and it's fascinating because at 1923 law, chapter 582, essentially gave them the power of the world for all the water in that area, water law. And I don't know if anyone's ever challenged it or got into court or whatever, but that's a lot of power for a company to have. And again, Haight family was all elected officials at the time, and it's complicated.
You showed that watershed map, and you don't have to go very far west where you throw water on one side and it winds up in the Gulf of Mexico. Right? Because the Allegheny River,
Yeah.
the Harbor far
Oh,
up, that
that's
comes
right.
this way, you know, it goes down by New Orleans.
If you go on Facebook, there is a Finger Lakes geology page. And if anyone knows Gary Knapp, I think it is, a photographer. Steve Knapp, I'm sorry. Steve Knapp he actually went to that site in northern Pennsylvania about a year ago. And it's in the middle of nowhere, but there's a sign there. It said it's a tri-watershed, 3 watersheds. And again, if you spill water this way, it goes here, there. So it's 2 or 3 hours from here, maybe 4, I don't know. But it is close by.
Water at Salamanca winds up in Mississippi, I think.
Well, there was rumors of Loon Lake actually being flowing 3 different ways too, underground.
Yeah.
That's not.
Probably not, but.
That's why it's called Loon.
I saw the name John Schiefen go by, and I believe he's still alive. He lives in Waterloo. He was a NICEAG supervisor. Went quickly in one of the.
What we might want to add, Vinny did an interview, I think it's going on 2 years now, or at least a year ago, with Bill Royston, who's been with New York State Electric and Gas 52 years, and he did, we have, thanks to Jerry, a video copy of an hour's worth of him showing how every component on that hydro plant works, because when he started working in 1952, that was his assignment too.
Wow.
And he's still with NICEAG. So as soon as we get permission, you'll see it on the town website, and you can see how all that equipment actually worked.
Yes, and it was very interesting. In the last, 10 or 20 years of the operation, it was mostly operatorless system. It was a fail-safe. You turn it on in the beginning of the shift or beginning of the week, whatever, and it shut it off automatically if there was a problem, or shut it off after so many hours of operation. So it was remotely operated.
Did I hear that video is currently on the town website?
No, it's.
Will be, I see, okay.
I got permission.
We're waiting for permission.
Like I
One
said,
last
it takes
question,
a
or-
long time.
Yeah. Any last questions? Yes.
I mean, maybe I'm not understanding something, but how could this system here cause the Cohocton River going through Bath be dry?
Because if you look at, say, 1900, Juanita and Lamoka flowed south through Cohocton. You dam it up, you send the water north to the power plant, and there's not going to be any flow down south.
Just like Creek.
But most of Bath's Cohocton River water comes from way up,
So,
Tabor's Corners or somewhere up there.
yeah, I'm not sure what the percentage is. You probably Mud Creek, they may have meant that probably would be dry. Again, you're dealing with people in the early 1900s who didn't get the story straight all the time, and so fake news. It probably wasn't fake news, but thank you.
Again, I would like to thank everyone for coming, but I really would like to thank Vinny. We have watched
Vinny.
him week after week, month after month, sitting in here with all of his boxes going through and sorting stuff. And every once in a while, some of us would come out and interrupt him. But he very graciously would let us do that. But when he was going through the boxes, not only did he sort them, he put them in some kind of an order, and he has also come up with an index for every single box. It's just been an amazing project.
Well, thank you. As I said, 2 last things. I have 2 more years' work on this at least. And if anyone here is from a historical society and wants these on disc or wants these on a thumb drive, just see me. I've got 2 extra here. And I'd rather, and besides Jerry's DVD that he's going to do, but if anyone wants it, I've got 2 extra up here. So stop up. Thank you.
And don't forget to look at what Vinny has put out on the back table. There's some things here. We also
Oh, yeah,
have
what's
things in
the
the history
tube?
room
You said
too.
you about that tube you held up.
Oh. This is what a lot of the documents, the blueprints came in. This is how they packaged them. I think this is a stovepipe from 1910 or 1920. So that's what, I think these things are homemade. I'm not sure if you could